Welcome back to another episode of FPO and G, Financial Planning for Oil and Gas Professionals. This week on the podcast, we're doing a lightning pod where we tackle a few topics, 10 minutes or less. We're going to talk about the SpaceX hourly employees who have become millionaires. We're going to juxtapose that with a conversation about CEO compensation packages in excess of $100 million being at an all-time high. We're also going to finish and talk about a study of boomers and their preferences to maybe not leave an inheritance to their kids and what that may or may not mean. Justin, which of those do you want to tackle first?
You know, Jared, how about we kind of go with the last one first? So let's tackle it's a money-wise story talking about boomers. And the title's a little, clickbaity. Boomers refuse to leave their $84 trillion in real estate and wealth to their adult kids. But how do you feel about starting with that one?
Yeah, I love it. Justin, so to start, well, of course, we'll link to the article. What's the premise of it?
So my favorite part about this article is it just had really good survey data around boomers' desires to leave wealth to their kids, their current plans to leave wealth to their kids. It had really good data around how many boomers have codified estate plans currently, how many do not. And then it also had some pretty interesting survey data comparing all of these figures among the boomer generation with Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. So it was fun to kind of dive into that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm like, the interesting thing, I don't know how much you looked about the footnotes. I think surveys are really fascinating and also problematic because it's all about, surveys are so fickle because humans are fickle, right? Inherently, like people will say things and they might do different things, right? That's the human experience one-to-one, is the cognitive dissonance of not always doing what you say you're going to do. But I think that one of the first things that I like is I just think about that headline and take it at face value. I think a lot of people dismiss their wealth, right? Like what I mean by that is like we'll run a Monte Carlo projection for a client. Hey, you're going to die with $50 million. And that's just such an unbelievable number that they just kind of don't believe it and they just dismiss it, right? So it's kind of like, if that is actually true, something about my life needs to change, but I don't know what to change and I'm kind of comfortable with the status quo. So I'm just going to kind of ignore that and act like that's actually not going to happen. So like, I don't necessarily think like, and I'd be curious if the survey delineates this, but like, I don't think a ton of people are, I'm not going to give my kids money. I think there's a subset that is not being intellectually honest with themselves that think, I don't have anything to give my kids, because they genuinely haven't done the math of seeing what the terminal assets of their portfolio value is.
That's an incredible point. I don't think I've ever heard anyone phrase it that way. Jared, something interesting happened. This was about 4 or 5 months ago. For the first time in my career, we sat down with a family who are clients of ours. And it was really fascinating to hear this because this family is they just retired in the last year. And the wife made a comment on the exact idea that you just mentioned. So, for our listeners, what Jared's talking about is Monte Carlo analysis, or just, kind of models, scenarios, analysis on investments, cash flow that really track out over the next 20, 30, 40 years. What are your investments going to do? 2, what is inflation going to do? And 3, how much are you going to spend? And the end result of this is these Monte Carlo scenarios can basically just give you some clear answers around, do you have enough money? Are you going to run out of money? Or is your principal going to continue to compound? Now, what you just referenced, Jared, is so true. It is very normal if you have a sustainable withdrawal rate that in these Monte Carlo scenarios, you're going to see that maybe you have $5 million today, but you're going to pass away with $42 million. And the numbers get so big over a 35, 40-year window that it looks like funny money. It looks fake. But back to my example from 3 or 4 months ago. So we're sitting down with these clients and the wife actually said, we met with someone 15, 16 years ago, and they ran these Monte Carlo scenarios and they told us, you're going to have, I think the number was $8 or $9 million when you retire around age 60. And to them, that seemed completely unattainable. It seemed totally fake. There's no way that this Monte Carlo analysis is right. There's no way they were going to get to retirement age with that much money. Well, that's exactly what happened. And so, Jared, I think it's important to point out that there can be kind of this, you look at the numbers and you're thinking, hey, this is not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to have an 8-figure sum to give to my kids or larger. And the reality is, well, in a lot of cases, you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I think, again, gets back to phrasing of this question, right? Like, because if you think about it, right, like if you don't plan to leave your kids with anything and you plan to spend indefinitely, like if you asked boomers what percentage of you plan to leave your kids with some of financial responsibility related to you outspending your assets, what percentage would say they're signing up for that, right? Like none, none. I also, people, the other thing to think about is people spending, right? If you think about pension, like a lot of the people that are presently retired have defined benefit plans, right? They have a monthly pension plus Social Security to cover the majority of their living expenses. So the composition of their balance sheet might not be meaningful, right? They might not look in their assets and see, I'm not a millionaire. But again, pretty much the entirety of their living expenses are recreated through a paycheck, which is no longer the primary retiree today has that same configuration. So, they might be doing this internal accounting of, yeah, I have these fixed income assets that are paying my income, or and I can live off those plenty. I don't have much on top of that. So they look at their balance sheet and think, hey, those go away when I die, so I don't have anything to give. But also, a lot of these people are sitting on tons of embedded gains in their housing because the majority of the older generations own their houses outright. So it's easy. I'm just empathizing that it's easy to feel like you have nothing to pass on. But I just don't think I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of these people are going to give more money than they expect because expect the worst and hope for the best. And I think they're just kind of discounting their reality and doing some mental accounting thinking, ignoring their income.
That's right. And Jared, I do think it's worth noting that there's a bunch in the boomer generation on both sides. So there was kind of a big Twitter or X thread kind of debating this article. And a ton of people in the comments made the note that, well, boomers are giving an enormous amount to their kids. And I've seen different, viral clips of realtors talking about this. But the vast majority of younger families buying homes in wealthy areas, they're doing so with some help. Maybe it's full help, maybe it's partial help from parents. And so it's not, I don't think it's fair to the boomer generation to say that it's wholesale. All of them are absolutely against helping kids with wealth. But it is interesting that there's definitely a segment of boomers that hates the idea of passing down money. So Newsroom also cited I believe this is a Northwestern Mutual survey, and it's saying, Jared, what is it? 22% of baby boomers intend to leave an inheritance to younger generations. So only 22%, only 1 in 5. And obviously boomers famously own the vast majority of wealth now. I also believe boomers own, so the portion of wealth in the US that is owned by Gen Z or what are we? What are millennials? We're Gen X, right? No, we're Gen Y.
We are millennials. Yeah, we are millennials. Gen X. Yeah, Gen X was before us.
Okay, so Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z, we own a drastically smaller portion of wealth in America than boomers did at our age. So there's definitely some on both spectrums. Jared, what's your personal thought? Like, do you get excited about building wealth to pass down to your kids?
Yeah, I do. A couple reasons. I think, unfortunately, right, as this wealth transfers, like I with this amount of wealth transferring, and again, based on these statistics, a lot of it's going to be unintentionally. There's a big slug of capital that's entering the market, right? And as down payment assistance increases, that doesn't help affordability, right? So you kind of have to do those things. But personally, right, like I want my kids to follow their passions, and their passions may have different economic incentives. And like, I kind of, I want them to be hard work. I care more about their level of effort than what they do, right? I don't want them to pursue something for the money. I want them to pursue what they love that's economic and kind of try to support them in that way. So I love the idea of passing down wealth because I think A, it's kind of a necessary evil at this point with the crash course we're on. But B, I just love the idea of, it being less of a domineering force in terms of decision making. But, of course you need the correct framework, and it all depends on the kid and how they mature and what they need. But what about you, Justin?
I'm the same way. I get very excited about passing wealth down to my kids. Not to go too far into the weeds, but I mean, and not to be too extreme, but 8, 9 years ago, I was pretty close to on my deathbed. And one of my biggest thoughts is I want to get better because I want to build a life for my kids. I love the idea of working every day for the rest of my life to build something huge to pass down to my kids. To be blunt, I don't resonate at all with the idea of, hey, I don't want to pass down anything to my kids. I want to spend my last dollar. So no judgment if that's your mindset. And we've certainly heard that, right, Jared? And so it's not as if we haven't heard that from prospective clients or clients. But personally, no, I want to work very hard. I want to grind so that I give my kids the world.
And it's interesting because I think a lot of the people that don't want to pass anything down to their kids are also dismissive of how good their financial circumstances are. So the people that are most likely not to pass down money to their kids are also the ones that are probably going to pass down money to their kids because they're kind of dismissive of their future reality. So, I think the operative word here is intend. What percent intend to? I think a much higher percent are actually going to leave something to their kids. So it's probably on you to decide, okay, maybe you don't want your kids to have anything. Make a conscious decision about that and set up figure out charitable giving, right? Or have your estate plan reflect caps of that amount of money, right? Because I think if you don't intend to do something, but then you don't have an estate plan and haven't projected out how this manifests, it doesn't really matter what your intentions are. You will die, and whatever is in those documents and whatever assets you have will be dictated by that, right? So I think intention is just you're not gonna end up where you want to go if you just intend to exclude your kids and just stop it there and just, hope you underspend because you probably will.
That's well put. Should we talk about this welder making $28 an hour?
Yeah. I love this, right? So it was linked to the tweet, but Juan Hernandez, who came to Mexico, welded rockets for SpaceX for $28 an hour. SpaceX gave him $10,000 when he went full time in 2015, and he bought more with every paycheck for 10 years. He's worth over $1 million now. And again, SpaceX is moving around a lot. We're recording this at the end of June in 2026. So he's probably having $100,000 swings. But I love this story because I feel like this is the story of America, and we've gone like decades without these types of stories, right? Like the last one I could think of, Justin, as we were preparing for this meeting, you were talking about Walmart, right? And my first job out of college was actually with a wealth management firm in Northwest Arkansas, close to Walmart's home office. And so we worked primarily with Walmart executives, but also we had clients who had meaningful portfolios, and they were early employees at Walmart. And that's really the last one I can think of. I'd be curious. There's probably other examples, but where the wealth was so transcendent and so distributed to where, rank and file employees were making life-changing amounts of money. I think it's cool and really inspiring, and part of what has made America great up to this point. And it's candidly, it's been too long since we've heard something like that. But Justin, what do you think about this?
Yes, what an incredible story. It also reminded me, there was a big story, we're talking in June, this was in end of May. The Economist released a story basically saying franchising has quietly made countless Americans rich. And so I love these stories of, man, there are so many ways to win financially. And that really is. Jared, you also did a podcast several years ago that dove into mineral rights and how that's something that's so unique about the US relative to other countries, that we didn't nationalize our mineral rights. So everyday citizens can own mineral rights. And that has obviously created, enormous amounts of wealth in oil and gas. But anytime a company has an equity compensation plan, when the company does well, it is so fun to see that, hey, it's not just the C-suite, it's not just the COO at like one of the 20 largest companies in the world doing well. It's everyone who has an equity stake is now getting an amount of money that they really didn't even dream of. And so we talked about this idea a month or two ago, just that I don't think the average person in America has any earthly idea how many people in America today have $3, $4, $5, $10 million just because they worked at a large company for 30, 40 years, and they didn't have to be anywhere close to the C-suite to do that. It's just they saved diligently, they had good benefits, and they probably had an equity compensation plan so that they slowly became a minority owner in their company. So truly incredible to look at.
I mean, I will say, right, one of the caveats is like this is illuminating in like risk management, right? So he got $10,000 in stock when he went full time, but he bought more with every paycheck for 10 years. The question I'm thinking about as a financial planner is what percentage of his retirement savings was SpaceX stock?
Oh my gosh.
And to be clear, I don't know if I would like the answer to that question.
No, I don't think I would like it.
Right. And again, so there's also like a risk management component here. Like the reason why he is now a millionaire is because he made a concentrated bet. Right. And again, like, and it illuminates like such an important point about accumulating and decumulating assets. Concentration makes you wealthy. Diversification keeps you wealthy. Yeah. Right. So the wrong conclusion to come to as a retiree is to own one part of the market and try to hit a home run. Right. Because that's what he did. He owned a single company and it happened to be a great company. Right. This same story with all of these same numbers to Enron, to any of the companies that have IPO'd and gone out of business. Right. Very different financial outcome. And so like, I want to celebrate this, but I also want to take a step back and right size it that, man, there might be some, part of this was luck, and I wouldn't recommend this recipe, but when it does work out, we celebrate it.
That's so well put. Should we contrast this with the last article?
Yeah. I think it's kind of funny because we're talking about This is so Justin. The article's in the Wall Street Journal, and it talks about the number of pay packages for corporate executives in excess of $100 million is at an all-time high.
And real quick, Jared, I want to edit your sentence, $100 million per year. So annual compensation topping $100 million.
Yeah. So, wow. I don't even know where we go for this. I'd be curious, you wanted to put this in there. So I'm curious what you have to say and how you think about this idea, especially in tension with the idea that we just talked about of, SpaceX minting millionaire welders.
Okay, I've got a takeaway from this that maybe this is a weird takeaway. Maybe it's not the takeaway that most people would have. Jared, the first thing that I thought when I read this story that a record number of American CEOs are now making more than $100 million a year. The first thing I thought is this Nick Murray idea of be an owner, not a loner. As an investor, you better own stock. You better own great companies rather than getting scared of market volatility, getting scared of the potential of future market crashes, and going all safe, keeping all of your money in bonds and cash. Having been in this business for more than a decade, I have seen a ton of clients that want to do that. I can think back to 2011, 2012, or specifically, I'm really thinking 2016, there was a lot of volatility, and some 2013, 2014. But really specifically thinking about some of the volatility in 2016, Jared, I remember meeting with clients and talking through just this fear of, hey, the market's gone up for 7 years now since 2009. We're seeing some volatility. It's time for a market crash. Surely it's going to come down. And Jared, we're here 10 years later. And guess what? American companies have found ways to provide incredible value back to their shareholders. And it's a bubble and stock prices have gone completely out of whack. Earnings have also increased. And so my biggest takeaway is companies have done unbelievably well. This is arguably the greatest, 17-year stretch for American companies in the history of our economy. So you could argue this is the greatest 17-year stretch we've ever had. My biggest takeaway, is you better have a healthy portion of your portfolio allocated to owning great companies, not playing it safe with bonds and cash.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good takeaway, right? I think like for me, one of my big takeaways is spend the money, right? Like, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Like if you think about, right, one of the places my family loves to go is Newport Beach, California. At any given point, you could have looked at the real estate market and said, this has got to burst, right? Newport Beach as a real estate market has been expensive for decades.
I bet half of the CEOs in this story have real estate in Newport Beach.
Right. Or within a 100-mile radius. But, right, like you could have been, kind of getting back to be an owner, not a loaner, right? Like if something really gets you excited and lights you up, spend the money, right? Like if you would have bought the Newport Beach house like 10 years ago, it would be worth a lot more because there's a lot more people in this space who are having second, third, fourth homes, right? And I think like it's just such an important idea to like spend in ways that are consistent with your values because you think, hey, things are going to get cheaper, but that's not necessarily the case. And especially like luxuries, right? Is the upper class and people making this amount of money increases. There's the problem is not just consumption behavior. It's, there are way more families with multiples more families with $50 million than there were 20 years ago. Right. So like the demand, not only inflation has happened, but the people that have entered that class has increased. Right. And so, it doesn't mean that it can't go down, but I think if you're waiting it to go down and it can meaningfully improve your life, I would say spend the money, right? Because this is, I think that's a part of it. And I just, the other thing, man, my other big takeaway is that like the American company is remarkable at capital allocation.
It's
right?
It's like, amazing.
The fact, and the crazy thing is with how many companies there are that produce revenue to even support this is insane. But also that the market has decided that companies, that a person in this seat can make decisions that outweigh that compensation package is just mind-boggling to me, right? And if you look at like, there's regulation in terms of how much you can even compensate a CEO. And C-suite of a publicly traded company with cash compensation. So inevitably, this is a lot of equity compensation. But the fact that they have decided, and these boards vote on these compensation packages, and sometimes shareholder votes for these compensation packages, the fact that you could even rationalize, the incremental value of a good chief officer in this spot could actually meaningfully impact the organization more than that is just insane. It shows you just how far along American businesses are.
Agree, Jared. Part of me thinks on the one hand, it's hard for me to really even philosophically agree that CEO 1 is so much smarter than CEO 2, so I'm going to pay $100 million to keep CEO 1. But the other thing that comes to my mind is, well, pay is at this level because it's a fraction of what the company is making. So it's just further evidence that these companies are doing unbelievably well, which is exciting to see. And, Jared, some of my internal notes in our company Slack thread on this, yes, inflation is really high and it's pretty brutal in America, especially for certain people in the economic ladder. But asset inflation is unimaginably high. And that's what you're talking about with your real estate example. And, guess what? Life is a little bit difficult if it was 2012, 2014, 2016, and you started to get scared that, hey, asset prices have now gone up for several years in a row. Surely they're about to come crashing down again, just like they did in 2008 and in 2000. And Jared, we've said this idea before, and we should repeat it on almost every episode. Your investment convictions should have a baseline assumption that asset prices are probably going up. So your investment convictions, the lens that you make investment decisions, it should never assume, well, there's about to be a big crash. We know crashes will happen. They always have, they always will. But you cannot make sound, long-term, great investment decisions through a lens of, I really think it's going to crash in the next 10 months. It never works that way.
Yeah, I think it's Sahil Bloom who says, or he quoted somebody, I got to find the original quote, but if pessimists are more likely to be right. Optimists are more likely to be rich, right? And like, I think the final thing I would say here is that it is, there is a lot of concern with inflation, but it has also never been easier to make $10 million, right? You hear about all these AI companies and people just like having agents do all this work and just recreate, like just deploy themselves in meaningful ways and make millions of dollars in top line revenue with no building, right? Like most of human history, you had to buy a building, you had to buy inventory, you had to buy goods, right? And now we can have agents code stuff and it can be distributed to the world if the idea is good enough. I do think there's power in that. And, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like it's kind of concerning, right? And, the K-shaped recovery that they talked about where kind of higher classes are doing great, but kind of lower income classes aren't doing great. And there's kind of sub economies within the economy because of how much dispersion there is with wealth. That's also a real thing too. But I want to leave on a positive note and say, hey, it's never, the fact that this is possible and it's never been easier to make this should be confidence inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Jared, it was funny in this Wall Street Journal newspaper. So on the front page, and I sent a picture to our team, but on top of the front page of the journal, this is the bottom half of the front page. It's the story, a $100 million payday for U.S. CEOs is back. The story directly underneath it is Bed Bath & Beyond will take your decades-old coupons. And it's a story about people who have saved Bed Bath & Beyond coupons since 2007. Apparently, the company is now going to accept those coupons. So if you've been hoarding coupons and you've been waiting to save $6.24 on some new bath towels, now's your time.
Now's your time. Yeah, I think, that's the good financial planning lesson where you can only, like there is a finite band to what you can save. There's a less finite band, but I'd say there's an infinite no band to what you can earn. So I think, it's also you need to correctly allocate your time and attention there. But Justin, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Another lightning pod in the books. Always love hearing from our listeners, ideas for future episodes, feedback on the podcast. We love hearing from you. podcast@brownleewealthmanagement.com. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Nothing discussed during this show or episode should be viewed as investment, legal, and tax advice. If you have questions pertaining to your specific situation, please consult the appropriate qualified professional.